Ambassador Yellen Vasquez stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord and tried not to show her anger on her face. The chamber stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, and representatives from 17 species filled the floating platforms that circled the central speaking floor like layers of a great cake. She was the only human in the room. The Vethkai delegate had been speaking for the past hour, his crystalline body catching the light and scattering it into rainbows as he moved, his forearms in elaborate gestures that his species considered the height of sophisticated communication. And so we must consider, he said, his voice resonating through the translation systems built into every seat, whether the newest members of our Concord truly deserve the trade routes they have requested. Yellen knew what was coming next because she had heard variations of this speech 100 times in her 5 years as Earth's ambassador. The humans, the Vethkai continued, and she could hear the amusement in his translated tone, are a curious species, are they not? They possess no psionic abilities whatsoever. Their bodies are soft and fragile. They live for barely a century, and their technology remains primitive by any reasonable standard. Laughter rippled through the chamber, a sound made strange by the mixture of species producing it. And Yellen kept her expression neutral. Perhaps, the delegate said, we should assign them routes more suited to their capabilities. Carrying waste materials from the outer colonies, perhaps, or delivering food supplies to mining stations where no respectable species would wish to travel. More laughter. Louder this time, Yellen thought about responding. But she had learned that defending humanity's honor only made things worse, because it gave them more opportunities to explain exactly why humans deserved no honor to defend the Galactic Concord. Had existed for 12,000 years before humanity had stumbled into faster-than-light travel. And in all that time, they had developed very clear ideas about what made a species worthy of respect. Psionic power mattered most, and the Vethkai could kill with a thought, reshape matter with their minds, and communicate across light years through pure mental projection. Physical strength came second. And the Seer Dominion warriors stood 3 meters tall, with scales harder than steel and claws that could tear through hull plating. Lifespan meant wisdom. And the eldest members of some species remembered events from before humanity had learned to use fire. By every measure that mattered to the Concord, humans were the weakest species ever admitted to membership. They had been allowed in only because galactic law required acceptance of any species that achieved faster-than-light travel on their own. And 40 years later, they remained at the bottom of every hierarchy. Yellen returned to her small office after the session ended, walking past the towering seer guards who did not bother to acknowledge her presence, past the floating forms of the telepathic mind weavers who found human thoughts too simple to be worth reading, past all the beings who looked at her and saw nothing worth their attention. Her assistant, Marcus, was waiting with a cup of coffee. Real coffee shipped from Earth at considerable expense. And she accepted it gratefully. Bad session? He asked. The usual, she said, taking a long drink. They want to give us the Kepler routes and nothing else. Marcus winced because the Kepler routes were the worst assignments in Concord space, running through unstable regions near the edge of mapped territory. And no other species wanted them. At least we would have something, he said. That is what I will tell the council, Yellen agreed. Though the words tasted bitter, 12,000 light years away, on the frontier world of Kepler 442b, a young woman named Sarah Chun was having a much worse day than Ambassador Vasquez. Sarah worked as a communications technician for the human colony, monitoring the relay stations that kept them connected to Earth and to the Seer Dominion forces that supposedly protected their region of space for the past 3 weeks. She had been picking up strange signals from beyond the edge of mapped territory. Look at this, she said to her supervisor, pointing at the readouts on her screen. Same pattern again, same frequency, same duration. Her supervisor, a tired man named David, who had been running the communications station for 15 years, barely glanced at the data. We have reported to the SEER commanders 4 times already, he said. They say it is nothing. But the pattern, Sarah insisted. It repeats every 18 hours exactly. And it is getting stronger. The SEER have been monitoring this region of space for 3,000 years, David said. If there was something dangerous out there, they would know about it. Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it would do no good. Because humans had no authority here, and their concerns carried no weight. The SEER Dominion treated the human colonies as a buffer zone, settlements placed between their own territory and the unknown darkness beyond. And they had made it very clear that they did not value human opinions on matters of security. That night, Sarah stayed late at her station, watching the signals pulse in their strange rhythm. And she began to notice something that made her blood run cold. The signals were not just repeating. They were moving closer 3 days later. The outer settlements stopped responding to communications. Sarah reported it immediately. And this time, the SEER actually sent a patrol ship to investigate. The ship found nothing. The settlements were simply gone. Every building demolished, every person vanished. With no signs of battle and no clues about what had happened, the SEER commander reviewed the evidence and concluded that the humans must have abandoned their posts, probably fleeing deeper into Concord space to escape their frontier obligations. When Sarah tried to show him the signal data, he dismissed her with a wave of one massive clawed hand. You see patterns where there are none, he said. It is a common failing of your species, seeing threats in shadows because you are too weak to face real dangers. Sarah said nothing because there was nothing she could say that would change his mind, but she kept monitoring the signals, and she kept recording the data. And she noticed that after each settlement went dark, the signals changed slightly, as if something was learning from what it found. On the day the Galactic Concord announced that the mighty Vethkai 3rd Expeditionary Fleet would investigate the disturbances in the frontier region, Sarah Chun sent a message to Ambassador Vasquez on the Concord station. The message contained all her data, all her observations, and a single warning that the ambassador would not understand until it was far too late. They are not attacking, Sarah had written. They are hunting. The Vethkai 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was the most powerful military force assembled in the past 1,000 years. 400 warships stretched across the darkness of space, their crystalline hulls gleaming with internal light. Each vessel carrying crews of the most psychically gifted warriors the galaxy had ever produced. Admiral Kethras stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Thought, and watched the stars blur as his fleet entered the anomaly zone where the human settlements had vanished. He felt no concern. The Vethkai had crushed rebellions, ended wars, and brought entire species to their knees through the sheer power of their minds. And whatever lurked in this dark corner of space would soon learn why his people sat at the highest tier of the Galactic Concord. Begin sensor sweeps, he commanded, his thoughts transmitting directly to his crew through their shared psionic link. Find whatever is hiding out here and destroy it. For 6 hours. Everything proceeded normally. The fleet spread out in a search pattern, scanning every asteroid and dust cloud for signs of the enemy. And the data flowed back to the flagship in a constant stream of information. Then the ship at the far edge of the formation went silent. Admiral Kethras felt the psionic connection to the vessel simply cease, like a candle being snuffed out. And for a moment, he thought it must be a technical malfunction. Contact the Radiant Mind, he ordered. Determine why they have stopped transmitting. Before his communications officer could respond, another ship went dark, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. The Admiral reached out with his mind, trying to sense his lost crews. and found nothing but emptiness where hundreds of his people had been moments before. All ships, defensive formation. He shouted, abandoning the dignity expected of a Vethkai commander. Whatever is attacking us, find it now. His fleet began to pull together, but the enemy moved faster than anything they had ever encountered. Ships vanished in clusters, their crews dying so quickly that they could not even send a final thought to their comrades. And the darkness between the stars seemed to swallow them whole. Admiral Kefers watched his sensor display as green dots representing his vessels turned red and then disappeared entirely. And he understood with terrible clarity that he had led his people into something far beyond his ability to fight in his final moments. As the darkness closed around his own flagship, he managed to send a single psionic burst back toward Concord space. It contained no words, only raw emotion, shock, terror, and a desperate warning that died with him seconds later. The Galactic Concord received that burst 3 days after the fleet departed. By then, all 400 ships had gone silent, and 60,000 of the galaxy's most powerful warriors had ceased to exist. Panic spread through the Concord like a disease. The Vethkai had been considered invincible for as long as anyone could remember, and now their mightiest fleet had been destroyed without inflicting a single confirmed casualty on the enemy. The Seer Dominion mobilized every ship they possessed and positioned them along their borders, their warrior caste eager to prove they could succeed where the Vethkai had failed. The Krath Collective, an insectoid species that communicated through chemical signals, began fortifying their homeworld with weapons that had not been activated in 10,000 years. Ancient species whispered about legends from before recorded history, stories of a time called the Silence, when entire civilizations had simply vanished. From the galaxy, Ambassador Yellen Vasquez watched the chaos unfold from her small office and felt no satisfaction in seeing the species who had mocked humanity now trembling with fear. She only felt the cold weight of Sarah Chun's message still unanswered on her desk, and wondered if anyone would listen to a human now. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was the first person to take the situation seriously. She was a Zen archaeologist, a human scientist who studied the ruins of dead civilizations, and her career had been spent being dismissed by colleagues who considered her theories too wild and her methods too unorthodox. Now she sat in her tiny research station on a moon no one cared about, reviewing the telemetry data from the Vethkai fleet's final hours. And she saw something that no one else had noticed. The ships had not gone dark all at once. They had gone dark in a pattern. Dr. Okonkwo pulled up records from Earth's history, searching through files that most humans had forgotten and that no alien had ever bothered to read. And she found what she was looking for in the hunting techniques of ancient African tribes, persistence hunting. It was called the practice of tracking prey over long distances, wearing them down gradually, never attacking until the target was isolated and exhausted. The Vethkai fleet had been hunted. Whatever killed them had not rushed in for a quick victory, but had instead picked off ships one by one, starting with those at the edges of the formation, slowly tightening the noose until none remained. This was not the behavior of a mindless threat or a territorial species defending its home. This was strategy. Dr. Okonkwo sent her analysis to Ambassador Vasquez with a note explaining what she had found, and she included Sarah Chen's original data showing how the signals from beyond mapped space had moved and changed after each settlement was destroyed. They are learning, she wrote. Every attack teaches them more about us, and they are getting better. The ambassador read the report and felt a chill run down her spine. She took the analysis to the Concord Assembly, requesting an emergency session to present human findings about the enemy. And she was laughed out of the chamber. You expect us to believe, the new Vethkai delegate said, his voice dripping with contempt despite his species' recent loss. That a species too weak to defend its own colonies has somehow understood what our greatest minds could not. The pattern is clear, Yellen insisted. If you would just look at the data. We have looked at it, the seer representative interrupted. We see nothing but human fear projected onto random events. The assembly voted to dismiss the human analysis and proceed with their own plans. More fleets, more firepower, more of the same strategies that had already failed. Yellen returned to her office, knowing that the more of the same strategies that had already failed. Yellen returned to her office, knowing that the Concorde would not listen until it was too late that night. She sent a secure message to Earth, addressed to a department that did not officially exist, containing everything she had learned and a single recommendation. They will not believe us until the situation becomes desperate, she wrote. We must be ready when that happens. On Earth, in a building with no signs and no windows. A group of men and women read the ambassador's message and began making plans. They had been preparing for this moment since first contact 40 years ago, since they had looked at the galaxy and realized that humanity would never survive. By playing the Concorde's games, the galaxy thought humans were weak. It was time to show them what weakness really looked like. The enemy had a name now, the Hollow. They emerged from the darkness beyond mapped space like a tide of metal and malice. Machine intelligences that had slumbered for 3 million years, until the expansion of the Galactic Concorde had disturbed their ancient rest. No one knew who had built them or why, and no one knew what they wanted. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply arrived at a world, stripped it of every resource and every living thing, and moved on to the next target. The Seer Dominion sent their warrior fleet to stop them. 500 ships crewed by the most fearsome soldiers in known space. And the battle lasted less than 2 hours. The Hollow adapted to every weapon the Seer used. Plasma cannons that could melt through mountains did nothing against hulls that reconfigured themselves in real time. And psionic attacks that should have scrambled machine systems simply bounced off shields, designed to counter threats the Concorde had never imagined. The Seer died bravely, because that was all they knew how to do, and their homeworld fell 3 weeks later. The Kreth Collective lasted longer only because their insectoid bodies were of less interest to the Hollow. But eventually they too became targets. Billions of Kreth perished as their underground hive cities were torn open and harvested for raw materials. And the survivors scattered across the galaxy in desperate refugee fleets. The Galactic Concorde, which had stood for 12,000 years as the ultimate authority in known space, began to crumble. Species that had been allies for millennia now fought each other for escape routes, and ancient treaties were abandoned as everyone scrambled to save themselves. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez received the summons she had been expecting. On a cold morning 6 months after the Vethkai fleet's destruction, the Concorde wanted to see her. She walked into the great hall where she had been mocked so many times and found it nearly empty. The floating platforms that had once held 17 species now occupied by only a handful of desperate survivors. Ambassador, the Vethkai delegate said, his crystalline form dimmer than she remembered. We have a proposal for humanity. Yellen waited. The Concorde requires evacuation vessels, he continued, and she could hear the shame in his translated voice. Ships to carry refugees from threatened worlds to safe harbors beyond the Hollow's reach. You want us to be your transport service. Yellen said, it is the role best suited to your capabilities. The delegate replied, human ships are small and slow, but there are many of them, and they can reach places where larger vessels cannot go. Yellen thought about all the times this delegate and others like him had dismissed humanity as worthless, all the insults and mockery she had endured, and she felt a small spark of satisfaction at seeing them reduced to begging for help. but she buried that satisfaction deep, because it would not serve her purpose. "We accept," she said. The delegate seemed surprised, perhaps expecting her to demand concessions or extract promises of better treatment in exchange for assistance. "You do not wish to negotiate terms?" he asked. "There will be time for that later," Yellen replied. "For now, saving lives is what matters." She left the assembly and returned to her office, where Marcus was waiting with a secure communication device. "It is done," she told him. "They have asked us to run evacuations." Marcus nodded and activated the device, sending a coded signal to Earth. "Phase 2 begins," he said. The human evacuation fleet assembled within weeks. Hundreds of cargo ships and passenger vessels modified for long-distance travel. And they began the work of moving refugees from dying worlds to safety. The Concorde paid no attention to what the human engineers were doing to those ships during the long journeys between destinations. They did not notice the extra compartments being added to cargo holds, or the unusual modifications to engine systems, or the strange equipment being installed in sections that were declared off-limits for maintenance purposes. They certainly did not notice the encrypted communications passing between human commanders, coordinating something far larger than a simple refugee operation. Admiral Chen Wei-lin commanded the evacuation fleet from her flagship, the Endurance, a vessel that looked like an ordinary cargo hauler on the outside, but carried enough hidden weapons to fight a small war. She was 63 years old, a veteran of conflicts on Earth that the galaxy knew nothing about. And she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "a hollow harvester vessel has been detected in the Kepler system, pursuing refugee ships from the outer colonies." Chun studied the display showing the massive enemy ship, kilometers long and bristling with weapons that had already destroyed fleets far more powerful than anything humanity possessed. "How many of our vessels are in range?" she asked. 3 cargo ships, all carrying refugees from Kepler 442b. Chun made her decision in an instant. "Contact the Resolute," she ordered. "Tell Captain Morrison that Operation Trojan Horse is a go." The cargo ship Resolute was carrying 3,000 refugees when it received the Admiral's orders. Captain James Morrison read the message and felt his hands tremble, but not from fear. He had volunteered for this mission, knowing what it might require. "All hands," he announced over the ship's intercom. "Prepare for emergency evacuation. Transfer all refugees to the Endurance immediately." The transfer took less than an hour. Shuttles racing back and forth between ships, while the hollow harvester vessel grew closer on their sensors. When the last refugee was safely aboard the Endurance, Captain Morrison ordered his crew to evacuate as well. "I will handle the rest," he told them. He piloted the Resolute alone toward the approaching harvester vessel, broadcasting distress signals to make himself look like a helpless target. The Hollow took the bait. The harvester vessel matched speeds with the Resolute and began extending its collection arms, preparing to strip the ship for parts like it had done to so many others. It did not notice the nuclear device hidden inside the Resolute's waste processing system, a weapon crude by galactic standards, but devastating in close quarters. Captain Morrison waited until the collection arms had made contact with his hull, establishing a physical connection between his ship and the enemy. Then he pressed a button. The explosion tore through the harvester vessel's collection systems and burned deep into its internal structure, causing damage that no Concorde weapon had managed to inflict in months of warfare. The Hollow did not die, but it was wounded, and for the first time since the invasion began, one of its vessels retreated. Admiral Chun watched the aftermath from the Endurance's bridge and allowed herself a small smile. "Send a report to Earth," she ordered. "Tell them the first test was successful." The message reached Earth 12 hours later, and in the building with no signs and no windows, The men and women who had been preparing for 40 years began the next phase of their plan. The galaxy thought humans were weak because they had no psionic powers. No natural weapons, no ancient technologies, but humans had something the galaxy had never learned to appreciate. They had spite. They had the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only logical outcome. And now they had proven that even the Hollow could bleed. The war was about to change. The Hollow had never encountered anything like humanity before. For 3 million years they had slumbered. And in the time before their sleep, they had conquered species that wielded powers humans could barely imagine. Beings of pure energy and thought who had seemed invincible until the Hollow proved otherwise. Every enemy they had faced followed predictable patterns. The strong species attacked with overwhelming force and died. When that force proved insufficient, the clever species tried to outthink the Hollow and failed when the machines adapted faster than organic minds could plan. And the desperate species fled until there was nowhere left to run. Humans did none of these things. Admiral Chen Weilin coordinated a campaign that broke every rule of galactic warfare, using tactics so primitive that the Hollow's predictive systems could not anticipate them. She did not attack the Hollow's warships directly, because she knew humanity could not win those battles. Instead, she attacked everything else. Human raiders struck at Hollow supply lines, destroying the automated transports that carried raw materials from harvested worlds to construction facilities. They planted viruses in Hollow communication networks, not sophisticated programs designed by alien engineers, but crude human malware that exploited weaknesses the machines had never needed to defend against. They used relativistic kill vehicles, simple chunks of rock accelerated to near-light speed and aimed at Hollow manufacturing centers. Weapons so basic that the Hollow had never bothered developing countermeasures. The enemy adapts to everything we do, Admiral Chun explained to her commanders. So we must always be doing something new. She rotated tactics constantly, never using the same approach twice in a row, keeping the Hollow off balance by refusing to establish any pattern they could learn from. The Concord survivors watched in amazement as human forces achieved results their mightiest fleets had failed to match. A Vethkai commander named Salaskri, one of the few who had survived the destruction of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, requested permission to observe human operations firsthand. Admiral Chun granted her request and assigned her to a frontline unit led by Captain Maria Santos. "I do not understand," Salaskri said after watching the humans fight for 3 weeks. "Your soldiers have no psionic abilities. Your weapons are primitive, and your bodies are fragile. Yet you continue to inflict damage on an enemy that has destroyed everything we sent against it." Captain Santos smiled and wiped the blood from a cut on her forehead, a wound she had received during a boarding action on a Hollow scout vessel. "You want to know our secret?" she asked. Salaskri nodded. "We evolved on a planet that was trying to kill us," Santos explained. "Everything on Earth was dangerous. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the water could kill you if you drank from the wrong source. Many species evolved under harsh conditions," Salaskri pointed out. "True," Santos agreed. "But most of them adapted by becoming stronger or faster or developing natural weapons. The things you value in the Concord." She gestured at her own body. "Small and soft by galactic standards, humans adapted differently. We became persistent." Salaskri did not understand. "My ancestors hunted by chasing their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion," Santos continued. "They could not outrun their targets, but they could keep following them for hours, for days if necessary, never stopping, never giving up, until the prey was too tired to escape." "That seems inefficient," Salaskri said. "It is," Santos admitted. "But it works, and that is what matters." She pointed at the hollow vessel burning in the distance, destroyed by a human assault team that had spent 6 hours cutting through hull plating with hand tools after they're powered. Equipment failed. The hollow expects enemies who attack with everything they have, and then retreat when the attack fails, she said. They are not prepared for enemies who keep coming, no matter what. The demonstration of human persistence came 3 days later when a hollow assault force landed on a colony world called New Brisbane. The Concorde had written the colony off as lost, but Admiral Chun ordered a counterattack anyway. Human soldiers in sealed combat suits dropped onto the surface, fighting in an atmosphere so toxic that a single tear in their protection meant death within minutes. The Hollow had never expected ground combat in such conditions, because no sane species would choose to fight there. Humans fought there anyway. For 72 hours, the battle raged. Human soldiers pushing forward meter by meter, taking casualties that would have broken any Concorde force, refusing to retreat even when victory seemed impossible. Selaskri watched the battle from orbit and saw something she had never witnessed in her centuries of life. Human soldiers carried their wounded comrades to safety while continuing to fire at the enemy. They advanced over the bodies of their fallen friends without hesitation. They died with weapons in their hands and defiance in their eyes, and when the ammunition ran out, they attacked the Hollow with knives and bare fists, fighting hand-to-hand against machines designed to destroy civilizations. New Brisbane was liberated at the cost of 4,000 human lives. Admiral Chen received the report and immediately began planning the next operation, because in human warfare, there was no time to mourn until the fighting was done. Ambassador Vasquez visited the surviving soldiers in a field hospital after the battle and asked one of them, a young woman missing her left arm, why she had kept fighting when the situation seemed hopeless, because giving up was not an option. The soldier replied simply, "We are human, and humans do not quit." Vasquez thought about the speeches she had endured in the Concorde Assembly. All the time she had been told that humanity was too weak to matter, and she wondered if the galaxy was finally beginning to understand weakness was not about physical strength or psionic power or technological advancement. Weakness was about giving up when things got hard, and by that measure, humanity was the strongest species the galaxy had ever seen. The Hollow seemed to recognize this truth as well. For the first time since the invasion began, their advance slowed as they pulled back forces to study this strange new enemy that would not die when it was supposed to. Admiral Chun used the respite to prepare for the final phase of the war. They know we are dangerous now, she told her commanders. They will not underestimate us again. What do we do? Her tactical officer asked. Chun smiled, and there was no warmth in it. We showed them that dangerous was only the beginning. The Hollow came for Earth on a morning in late autumn. 400 harvester vessels descended from the darkness between stars, the same number that had destroyed the Vethkai 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. And their meaning was clear. They had identified the source of their troubles, and they intended to end it. Admiral Chen Weilin stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the enemy approach, her face calm despite the fear she felt in her heart. Every ship humanity possessed had gathered to defend their homeworld. 300 vessels ranging from converted cargo haulers to purpose-built warships, joined by the battered remnants of the Concorde's forces who had chosen to stand with their former servants. It was not enough, Admiral, her tactical officer reported, his voice steady despite the situation. The enemy will be in weapons range in 6 hours. Chun nodded and opened a channel to her fleet. All ships, she said. You know what is at stake today? Behind us is Earth. Behind us are 8 billion people who cannot run and cannot hide. Behind us is everything we have ever loved. She paused, looking at the faces of her crew. Men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not survive. The Concord thought we were weak. She continued. They laughed at us, dismissed us, treated us as servants and fools. And maybe they were right about some things. Her voice hardened. But they were wrong about the thing that matters most. Because weakness is not about what you are. Weakness is about what you choose to do when everything seems lost. She smiled. And her crew smiled with her. Today, we show the galaxy what humans choose. The battle began at noon. Human ships rushed to meet the Hollow fleet. Not in the orderly formations that the Concord favored, but in chaotic swarms that struck from every direction at once. They died by the dozens. But they took Hollow vessels with them, ramming their ships into enemy hulls, detonating nuclear warheads at point-blank range. Fighting with a ferocity that the machines had never encountered, the Hollow adapted as they always did, reconfiguring their weapons and shields to counter human tactics. And the human losses mounted higher with each passing hour. By evening, half the human fleet was destroyed. Admiral Chun watched her forces dwindle and knew that they could not win this way. But she also knew that she had never intended to win with these ships alone. Signal the reserves. She ordered her communications officer sent the code. A simple message that traveled to hidden locations throughout the solar system. And the galaxy learned that humanity had been keeping secrets for 40 years, since the day of first contact. Humans had been preparing. They had built shipyards in asteroid belts and manufacturing facilities on moons that the Concord had never bothered to survey. And they had crewed them with volunteers who had lived in secret for decades, waiting for the day their species would need them. Now that day had come. Ships emerged from hiding places throughout the solar system. Hundreds of vessels that no one had known existed, armed with weapons that humanity had developed in secret while the Concord dismissed them as primitives. The Shadow Fleet, they called it. And it fell upon the Hollow like a hammer. The battle turned from a desperate defense into something that approached an even fight. Human ships striking with coordinated precision while the original fleet regrouped and rejoined the battle. But even with the reserves, it was not enough. The Hollow were too numerous, too adaptable, too powerful. And they continued to push toward Earth despite everything humanity threw at them. Admiral Chun watched 3 more of her ships die and made the decision she had been dreading. Contact the volunteers, she said quietly. Her communications officer hesitated. Admiral, are you certain? Do it. Throughout the human fleet, men and women received the call they had been waiting for. The final request. The last option. The choice that only humans would make. They were called the Torchbearers. Volunteers who had agreed to pilot their ships directly into Hollow vessels with antimatter warheads strapped to their hulls. 117 people answered the call. They flew into the heart of the Hollow formation, weaving through enemy fire, ignoring the damage to their ships, focused only on reaching their targets. Most of them died before they could complete their missions. 43 did not. 43 antimatter explosions tore through the Hollow fleet, destroying harvester vessels and crippling dozens more, creating chaos that the human forces exploited with ruthless efficiency. The battle raged for 9 days. Earth's oceans boiled in places where Hollow weapons struck, and 3 continents burned as debris rained from the sky. And 18 million humans died in the crossfire between their defenders and their would-be destroyers. But humanity did not break. They did not surrender. They did not give up on the 9th day. Admiral Chun led the final assault personally, piloting the Endurance into the heart of the Hollow command vessel, a ship so large it could have swallowed cities. Her crew fought through corridors filled with machine soldiers, taking casualties every step of the way, until they reached the central processing core where the Hollow coordinated their invasion. Chun planted the charges herself, her hand steady despite the wound in her side, and she looked at the machine consciousness that had killed so many of her people. You came to Earth because you thought we were weak," she said, her voice carrying through the translation systems the Hollow used to study their prey. "You were wrong." She detonated the charges and took the command vessel with her, the Hollow fleet. Suddenly, without coordination, fell into disarray. And the human forces showed no mercy. By sunset on the 9th day, the last Hollow vessel went dark, and the skies above Earth fell silent. The survivors gathered in the ruins of cities to watch the debris burn through the atmosphere. And for the first time in months, they allowed themselves to hope Ambassador Yelena Vasquez stood in the remains of the Galactic Concord Assembly Hall, addressing representatives from species that had once mocked her. "You offered us a seat at your high table," she said. "We decline." The delegates stirred in confusion. "We did not fight to replace you," Vasquez continued. "We fought because it was the right thing to do. Because that is who we are." She looked at each of them in turn. These beings who had dismissed humanity as worthless for 40 years. "We do not want your thrones or your titles. We do not want to rule the galaxy the way you ruled it." Her voice softened. "We only want you to remember one thing. The next time you look at a species and see weakness, make sure you are not looking at the thing that will save you." She turned and walked out of the assembly, leaving the gathered representatives in stunned silence. The galaxy would remember humanity, not as the weak species that had been laughed at and dismissed, but as the stubborn, persistent, impossibly courageous beings who had stood against the darkness when everyone else had fallen. In the years that followed, new species entering the Galactic Concord would ask why humanity held such respect among the elder races. And they would be told the story of the Hollow War. They would learn about Admiral Chun and the Shadow Fleet, about the torchbearers who gave their lives without hesitation, about the soldiers who fought in toxic atmospheres, and the scientists who found patterns in the darkness, and they would learn the lesson that the galaxy had finally understood. That strength was not about power or technology or psionic abilities. Strength was about the choice to keep fighting. When all hope seemed lost, humanity had made that choice, and the darkness had learned to fear them for it.